I'd also love to talk about sort of your longer term macro view, right? So I've heard you state for many months and on many platforms your view that the next decade is going to look very different than the last 3 or 4 decades, probably. And I think you've got a really tight framework for how to think through those differences. And so why don't I sort of open the floor to you, and you can kind of take it from whatever part of your broader thesis
He's loosening up.
Sense.
Yeah, this is a long one. I'm getting ready for this.
You had to stretch on that one. You had to
here we go. This is. I mean, this could be a multi-hour thing, so I don't want to maybe start from the very beginning and we'll go all the way through. We've talked about some of this on the previous conversation as well, but I'll say from 30,000 feet, and I want to be clear, I'm not a Johnny come lately on this. We've been talking about this for years.
Agreed.
It's because of populism, right? It kind of starts at populism. We have a cohort which is coming to political power, these millennials on down, right? Who believe that it's the median outcome, right, is more important than the mean outcome. That sounds like a very subtle difference. But if we start no longer maximizing for GDP, right, but start maximizing for median wealth, right, that is a dramatic change for outcomes for markets and outcomes for the economy. The way you do that after record inequality, which we sit at as it relates, well, it's improving in the last year or so, but up until 2 years ago, we sat at record inequality here in the U.S. Based on a Gini coefficient. The way you do that is you start doing helicopter money. You spend money from the government to individuals. You start sending dollars to people at the bottom, the median person, and you stop sending money to capital, right? And that's a demand side economics that's going to drive, because the people at the bottom, when they get money, what do? They all of a sudden, they couldn't buy that house. Now they can buy the house. They go buy a house. They couldn't buy that car, or they were driving a used car. They're going to upgrade, etc. Right? And so that drives inflation, right? You send money, helicopter money. The velocity of that is 1, right? What we were doing for 40 years is not that. We were not sending money to people on the bottom. We were sending money to people on the top. We were sending money. We were using monetary policy, which is lowering interest rates and doing QE, which is sending money to capital markets or lending money to people who can borrow it. And the overwhelming majority of the people, when I say people, mostly corporations and asset holders of those corporations, are the ones synthetically borrowing that money. And so we have been on this wheel, this hamster wheel of continually sending money to capital. And I've used this analogy before. I'll use it again. Planet Palo Alto. We've been sending money to Planet Palo Alto. This wonderful planet out in the distance, this shining purple light, in the sky, where they produce amazing technological innovations, right? And that money's been sent out there, not into our economy, but out to the economy of Planet Palo Alto. And Planet Palo Alto sends back these wonderful, wonderful technologies. They are Ubers and Amazons and Teslas and all kinds of things that are ultimately not only not money for demand, right, but they are supply, right? And so that's been very deflationary for 40 years. When we started doing record, monetary policy in the 1996, Greenspan realized that the natural state of unemployment could be much lower and it wouldn't cause inflation. And this seemed like a free trick, right? You just keep doing it. And it's, with only 2 mandates, price stability and maximum employment, why not just keep doing more monetary policy, sending more money to capital if you ultimately cause deflation and more maximum employment? Then you just keep doing more and more and more and more. And that's what we did, because it's a free look, right? The incentive structure was the Fed had 2 mandates. They were, following their 2 incentive mandates. And that meant unlimited monetary policy.
It's a free lunch as long as your objective, as you say, is to maximize the growth in GDP, and you
Correct.
don't mind sacrificing the wealth distribution.
Correct. And so,
or actually
that wasn't their mandate.
maximizing the well-being of a certain cohort. Or, I mean, another way to look at this is a generational divide, a regulatory and policy environment that is geared towards favoring boomers in power, favoring boomers, holders of the assets. And now there's a bit of a tussle and a struggle for power there.
In fact, that's true. I will say, though, I hate laying it out in those terms because I don't think the Federal Reserve, personally, I don't think the Federal Reserve was sitting there saying, we're really doing this for the wealthy people. I think they had a mandate to maximize GDP. And I think as far as they're concerned, dealing with inequality is not their job. That's government's job. And government wasn't doing their job. And so whenever there's a crisis, they came in and they did their job, which was to continue to stabilize the economy and whatnot, right? So I don't think it's as nefarious as your tone implies. I do think there are some structural things in place that, power begets power, and on the margin that does happen, right? But who knows, right? I don't want to, that's broadly.
That's fair enough.
And I like keeping it apolitical as well. So essentially, the Fed was the only game in town. I think I'm going to back up here for 2 seconds, and I think this is important. The Fed was created to smooth out the business cycle, right? It was created because democracy, at its core, it was created in order to not pass laws easily, right? They didn't want absolute power to corrupt the system. Our founding fathers didn't. They made it hard to pass laws. They made it, checks and balances and very difficult. But that led to lots of, booms and busts. And eventually, as a people, we said, hey, we don't like booms and busts. We're going to smooth this out. We're going to create an extra governmental, entity that helps deal with things quicker. Well, our founding fathers would probably be turning in their graves because ultimately what that did is that short-circuited the crisis. And crisis itself is a critical ingredient to change. So by taking out crisis, we've eliminated government's ability to get the mandate to cause change. And so the Federal Reserve was the only game in town because it kept coming back and quickly resolving problems. And so we never made changes. So again, I don't think it's a conspiracy per se. It's just we were trying to solve one problem, not thinking about the big picture, and dealing with short-term problems because government ultimately gets reelected in short-term cycles, and everybody cares about the short term. Nobody thinks about big long-term structural effects. So here we are, no major crises. I mean, yes, we had 2008. Yes, we had the tech bubble, but those were all resolved. We had COVID. Guess what? Resolved in a snap, right? It was a V bottom. But we didn't actually fix the core issue, which is we got more and more unequal. Our internally, we became more and more combative because everything's unfair and things aren't working. And here we are heading into a bigger crisis.